Ladies and gentlemen, SideStrafe back, and today we're taking a look at Anthem. This is going to be my mini review of the game, and hopefully will help you decide whether or not to pick this one up. But I did get into Anthem via the Origin Premier Access plan. Basically, you pay $15 for a month, and you get access a week early to the game. And not a huge fan of how they set that up, but as a content creator, I felt that it was important to get my hands on the game as soon as possible. Anyways, I want to say that I put about 20 hours into the game, but some of that time could have been spent messing around with graphics settings and whatnot, talking to Twitch chat, so, you know, we could even cut that down a few hours. But I did finish the main campaign, the story. You know, I've played, I want to say, 3 of the 4 javelins quite thoroughly, more so between the Ranger and Colossus, primarily Ranger. But with that said, just going to cut straight to the opinion. The combat's amazing. The combat system, fighting enemies, the animations that go along with the gunplay, and the special abilities and customizations that you can make to your javelins, absolutely fantastic. The 4 javelins themselves are great. They're so much fun. Storm, Interceptor, Colossus, Ranger. They're unique. They have different play styles and learning curves. They're great. They could use some tweaks, maybe some balances here and there. But overall, the javelin gameplay, the concept, the design behind the javelins, fantastic. The combat, for me, in terms of an open world co-op game, is some of the best. I find it to be more enjoyable than Destiny 1 and 2, Warframe, Borderlands, The Division. I really enjoy the combat in this game. On top of that, the movement systems that go along with the javelins is fantastic. Each javelin feels like it has its own speed. This Colossus here feels weighty, heavy, right? Kind of like Hulkbuster armor from Iron Man. You've got the Ranger, which almost feels like War Machine. You have the Interceptor, which feels like something that you might get out of Warframe, right? Like fast, ninja-like. And then Storm is kind of your mage javelin. So it's really cool that they've given each javelin its own unique feel, because often in video games you have a class-based system, and you get some classes that feel too similar to each other, and just there's not enough variety. I felt like I had that problem in Destiny, where there was like the 3 classes, but they didn't feel different enough, and a lot of their gameplay was somewhat generic. But here you have 4 javs, each with their own personalities in a way, and I love it. And I think that there is room to add more javelins in the future, as long as they adhere to this formula. Now, moving into aesthetics, the game looks great. You know, visually speaking, I don't really have any complaints in terms of how it looks. The animations are my favorite thing about the game. The javelins are very well animated. It is definitely worthy of the AAA stamp in terms of how well animated the javelins are. Some of the NPC interactions might be questionable, but really I would say that that is not the most important thing. As long as the actual core combat gameplay and movement systems are well animated, not that big of a deal. But, you know, as far as the look of the game, the lighting, the textures, I don't really have any complaints, assuming that you can run the game at an appropriate setting. And I'll start talking about performance after I discuss sounds, which are also great. The sound design in the game is fantastic. Most of the weapons feel pretty weighty. There might be a few exceptions here and there, but for the most part, the guns sound good. The explosions in the distance, the effects that we get, the Doppler effects and the reverb of the weapons and the explosions firing in the distance. It's great. You know, aesthetically speaking, I don't really have any complaints. Now, in relation to aesthetics, though, you have performance. How does the game run on PC? And for the record, I'm running here on an AMD Ryzen 2700X. We've got a NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1080 Ti, as well as 16 gigs of 3200 megahertz RAM. And the game is installed on a Samsung M.2 drive. So it's no slouch of a system, but yes, I am having some performance issues here and there. Obviously, everybody's computer is different. The game may have been programmed with some certain machines in mind. Perhaps, it runs better on an Intel than an AMD. Who knows? But anyways, for the most part, my game is playable. I can maintain 60 FPS, but I do have to sacrifice certain settings. I can't necessarily run the game at ultra. I do have to drop a few things to high, and while I'm streaming, I may even have to drop a few of those settings down to medium. And again, the game still looks great even with those settings. YouTube isn't going to do the game justice, but optimization has been a problem. I'm finding that it has uneven frame pacing. There are some stutters, either massive or micro. They're there. Optimization is definitely one of my bigger complaints with the game. And in some cases, I find certain areas to run worse than when I even played the demo. I'm not sure what's going on with that. I'm also noticing that there are some settings that I can turn off that just simply seem to not have any effect on the performance, which might lead me to believe that there could be some sort of background netcode issue, since this game is pretty much always online. It's always connected to EA servers for matchmaking and whatnot. So a little disappointed with the game's optimization, especially considering how much development time it's had, which, by the way, the game has been in development since the release of Mass Effect 3, sometime after that, which was in 2012. So you can do the math. That's a lot of game dev time, and actually a lot more than most devs get these days. Now, with that said, I think I've labeled a lot of pros, a lot of great things about the game. And perhaps some of the most important things about the game are really good. The problem is that everything that surrounds this gameplay is quite poor. The presentation of the story is not great. In fact, I would say downright terrible in some cases. There are some pieces of backstory thrown in. There's some cool cutscenes here and there. There's some bad ones too. But the game spends a lot of time telling you about things that have happened instead of involving you in them. A lot of the interesting aspects of the world, the lore, anything that has happened in this game's history, you don't get to take part in it. And most of the time, you are doing quests or missions that seem like they belong in an MMO. For example, early on, I had to do a quest where I needed to retrieve 12 echoes, and they're basically these glowing orbs, and you can only carry 3 at a time. And so I had to go get them and bring them back to an objective. And it was really early in the game, and I was thinking to myself, this feels like an MMO quest, a fetch quest. And at the time, I was trying to just solo it, and then I realized, you know what, I just need to bring in 3 other people, which I did, and we were able to complete it a lot quicker, but it was still a very boring mission to do in a game like this. And unfortunately, a lot of the missions in the future aren't much better. You're generally tasked with finding things, solving a couple of really basic puzzles, or holding an objective against hordes of enemies. And it's just always a repeated theme. The combat's great, and it makes up for how bad some of the missions are. But really, you tend to expect a little bit more out of something that has had this much development time. On top of that, a lot of the interactions with NPCs and characters throughout the game, which leads to these missions, is leaving much to be desired. If you're looking for a BioWare role-playing game, you're not going to find it here. It is definitely not an RPG. It is more so an action looter shooter. And the choices that you do have to make in terms of conversation are generally inconsequential to the gameplay. In fact, it seems like a lot of them are time wasters and potentially just there to artificially lengthen the amount of campaign time that there is. And I don't know, it just seems like a big waste of resources to me. I'm not sure if they were trying to make it seem like their game had some sort of roleplay element to it when it really doesn't. I feel like BioWare is trying to maintain a role-playing game developer reputation without actually making a role-playing game. So if you're looking for some in-depth character interaction and an attachment to a squad similar to that which may be found in a Dragon Age or a Mass Effect or any similar type of game, again, you're just not going to find it here. You should go into this game knowing that it is mostly about this cooperative combat experience. I would probably compare this more to a Monster Hunter World than I would actually to a Mass Effect or a Dragon Age. It feels like one of those games where there is a story, but it's not necessarily the focal point, and you're more concerned with going out, adventuring with friends, collecting loot, defeating threats. And now, you're not chasing giant monsters necessarily. It's not exactly the same thing, but it has that feel. It reminds me quite a bit of what I did play within Monster Hunter World. And I think had they marketed the game like that, like, hey, it's a sci-fi Monster Hunter with exosuits, I think a lot of people would have been on board for that. They could have saved time on a lot of the NPC dialogue and interaction, money as well. Obviously, voiceover doesn't come cheap. And they would have pulled off something pretty unique. Now, that's not to say that they still can't. They can, I think, repair a lot of damages going forward here and focusing on what the game does best, and that is the co-op combat situation. Now, with that said, the other thing that I mentioned was going to be very important to me was the exploration. And as you can see, the game world is beautiful, right? It looks great. It's lush. It's very much got a lot of interesting terrain features, some cool ruins here and there. But yes, it is going to get repetitive. It's a big map. There's a lot of verticality, obviously, because you can fly. And while there is a lot to look at, I can't help but wonder how interesting this map is going to be a week from now. 2 weeks in, are you going to be sick of seeing jungle? Because, again, that's all there is right now. Now, there's hints to other biomes in the codex. They talk about other regions. Other games sometimes separate the areas. We were talking about Monster Hunter. I think in that game, you go from jungle to a desert area. If you play a game like Destiny 2, there's different planets and moons that you visit. You have an Earth-like, you have a Mars-like, you have crazy-looking alien worlds with various textures and fauna and whatnot. Different types of enemies that you fight based on, the location. And I was kind of hoping for something like that, where you go from the jungle and then maybe you'd be in a desert or some snow-capped mountains. Like, all that stuff that you see in the distance, you can't go there. It's just scenery. And I can't help but feel like a lot of the issues that we're seeing within this game, not only in terms of optimization, but in terms of how the map is designed, comes down to the fact that they've chosen to use that Frostbite engine, which, again, was designed for Battlefield-style games. And sure, it does a fine job at that, but I just don't know if it was made for games like this. We also saw Dragon Age Inquisition as well as Mass Effect Andromeda using this engine, but they also suffered from performance issues, at least at launch. And at least in those games, there was more variety in terms of terrain or biomes, but here it's just this jungle, and I feel like it's going to get stale after a while, even though it is still pretty big. The other thing is, later on down the line, if they do decide to add a desert or something else, we're obviously going to see more load times, and the game is plagued with some of the worst load times out there as of right now. Transitioning from this game world back to the player hub, or even going into a cave, sometimes you're presented with a load time. And as I mentioned, I'm running this game on a Samsung M.2 drive, which is pretty fast. In most cases, load times are not a problem for me, so I can only imagine how bad it is for people that are running this game off of a regular mechanical hard drive or even a slower SSD. The day one patch did seek to remedy some of the load times. It's a massive patch, and it has resolved some issues and added some features to the game, but it's also introduced some new issues. In fact, my performance is a little worse after the day one patch, but again, that could just be me with my setup. Everybody's performance will vary, and so I don't know. I'm not sure that Frostbite is cut out to handle this type of game. I think it's probably great at creating Star Wars Battlefront and Battlefield games, 64 player, one single map, but this type of gameplay with lots of AI and so much going on, it might be too much for it to handle. Again, I'm not an engine expert. I'm not a programmer. The only experience I have is in gaming and playing other games that have engines that are able to render insane draw distances. And an example of that would, of course, be Assassin's Creed Odyssey, or Ghost Recon Wildlands, which I believe use the Anvil Next engine, which, okay, they have their issues too, but they're able to present us with seamless environments, insane in scale, with a lot of content available to us, plenty of NPC interaction, as well as enemies, and just beautiful, lush terrain and environments that are generally unforgettable. But here, I don't know. Could the engine be the problem? According to research that I've done, articles that I've read, yes, BioWare did have issues working on this, and it may have increased the length of time required to even develop this game, on top of the fact that they had developers coming and going from the team over the years. So, ultimately, any issues that I have found with this game seem to come down to design decisions, key decisions made by the higher-ups at BioWare, or even potentially EA. Clearly, there's talent here. There's beautiful models, animations, texture work. There's some great combat mechanics and gameplay in general that's just award-winning in my opinion. But yep, I feel like regardless of the amount of people that you have on board your battleship, it's ultimately going to come down to the captain. And therein lies the issues with Anthem. But with that said, even though I'm basically renting this game with my 1 month of Origin Premiere, I still want to buy the game. Once I cancel my Premiere access, I still want to pick this bad boy up. I can't help but enjoy myself when I'm playing cooperatively with friends or even strangers. And the combat, it just speaks to me. I love it, and I want to see where it goes. I want to see what they add to the game. Can this game be repaired further with more community feedback now that it's out? Again, I think it's a shame that it's taken so long to deliver this and fall so short in regards to story and exploration elements. But I can't help but be curious about what the future holds for this one, and I'll definitely continue to keep an eye on it. And I'd recommend the same thing. Keep an eye on it. If you're on the fence, if what you've seen here is not enough to convince you to pick it up, then don't. If you're looking for an old-fashioned BioWare RPG experience, you're not going to find it here. That's as simple as that, 100% confirmed. But if you are looking for some intense, third-person action with some great movement mechanics, some interesting javelin gameplay, and co-op that might be reminiscent of something found within Monster Hunter, or maybe even Warframe or Destiny, then hey, give it a shot. Check it out. Get your friend to refer you into some Origin Premiere access and play it for 10 hours. That's plenty of time to figure out whether you're going to like the game or not. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I really hope that this video has been of some use to you. If so, perhaps consider leaving a like, comment, favoriting, sharing, friends, family, pets. It all helps. Don't forget to check me out on twitch.tv/SideStrafe as well for some live streams. And I'll see you on the next one.